Welcome to Career Tools. Today's topic, the 8-minute rule. Here we go. One of the things I always struggled with a long time ago in my career was when to arrive for an interview, right? I mean, if you arrive too early, right, and you run into the interviewer and she's not ready, and then she's feeling flustered and hurried by your arrival and feels like she's got to entertain you in the 15 minutes before the interview, right? That doesn't, intuitively that doesn't sound good, right? That can't be a good start. And then, of course, if you arrive too close to the interview time, now they're worried about whether you're going to show up or not, and they start to worry. And again, in both cases, I've started the interview off poorly, mentally. At least the interviewer's not in a good place for me. And so I really struggled a lot with when I should show up.
Yeah, I think there are two schools of thought here on this generally in the popular culture. One is you can't be too early. In other words, go an hour early just to show them you're totally ready and prepared and everything. Unfortunately, there's a negative associated with that, which you alluded to, which it irritates people, or they have to walk by you for 45 minutes back and forth during their day, knowing that you're waiting to interview with them.
Right. And I'm probably going to irritate them already, so I don't want to pile on there.
Yeah. And the other thing is, well, if I'm late, it's not the end of the world kind of thing. Or if I rush and I make it on time in the last minute and I work wherever I'm working and then at the last minute rush over there and I start the interview out of breath or whatever, or not prepared, well, that's okay too, as long as I'm on time. Both of those are bad, are bad choices. And look, the fact is it matters. One of the core ideas of interviewing is to have the interviewer like you. Now, we don't teach liking exactly, but the fact is interviewers won't choose to take it to the next step or give you an offer if they don't like you. What we know is one of the ways they choose whether or not they like you is whether or not you make their life easier. So therefore, the opposite of that is let's not make their life harder. And that means being on time. And being on time in this case, believe it or not, means not too early and of course, not late. So the perfect time, that's where the 8-minute rule comes from. I bet some people are wondering. The fact is the perfect time is 8 minutes before your interview. And look, it's not hard. For those of you who are high Ds who think, I go on too long about points, there's your rule, 8 minutes early. If you want to know the details, we have 4 points today. Arrive 8 minutes early, prepare beforehand, take into account security, something that people seem to forget. And then, of course, you've got to plan for Murphy's Law as well.
Okay. So arrive 8 minutes early. Well, it's pretty clear what our recommendation is here, but of course there's probably some rationale behind 8 minutes. So why don't you tell me what that is? Yeah.
Look, you time your arrival so that you're in reception, and that means through security. We don't mean downstairs in the lobby, but in reception, the place where you're going to be interviewed at, 8 minutes before your interview. If you're sent to the interview room and the door is shut, right? In other words, if you walk up down a hallway and they say, go to that interview room B or whatever, and the door is shut for the interview, assume the previous interview is going on and wait outside for 8 minutes. Now, if you were 7 minutes early, okay, don't wait 8 minutes. You knock at the appropriate time. You knock assertively on the door at the appropriate time if, in fact, it was closed. And look, the reason is, as we've already alluded to, the reason it's 8 minutes is 10 minutes or more is too early. Okay. Candidates who arrive tend to see each other in reception. And even though the other person is not necessarily your competition, the moment's uncomfortable. The interviewer is invariably not ready. They've just come from another meeting. They've just arrived at work. We'd love to tell you that all interviewers spend 30 minutes before an interview preparing, but it's just not so.
Really? Really?
Yeah. In most cases, it's 15 minutes or less. And the real word there is probably less. That's one of the reasons why we believe that interviewing is another one of those manager tools and career tools ideas, which is in the land of the blind, the one-eyed person is king or queen. You just have to be better than everybody else to have a competitive advantage. And if you arrive too early, you cut into their preparation time, particularly if there's no waiting room. If they say, oh, good, it's just going to be in a few minutes. Why don't you walk down and hang around by the cubes? And then you end up leaning up against the wall in a hallway, waiting for the manager who is on the phone, finishing up a conference call or something. And she sees you there and she's like, oh, great. I don't want to have this conversation in front of somebody who doesn't work for us. And so now I have to chat with them and maybe I'll say no to them. And so now I've got to spend more time with somebody I want to say no to. So don't get there too early.
Get rid of the idea that somehow if they have less time to prepare, that somehow you're going to be able to pull one over on them, or you're somehow going to be better because they're less prepared. That is not
the less prepared a manager is, the harder it is to get hired by them. Simple as that. Now, I suppose there are exceptions where managers who just, pull it out at the last minute and say, I like this guy, I think we'll hire him, right? But nowadays, I don't think too many managers do that.
No.
And look, the other side of the coin is less than 8 minutes beforehand is too close. A former boss of Wendy's used to tell her that a start time of 9 o'clock didn't mean you could arrive at 9. It meant you had to be at your desk, your computer booted up, first cup of coffee poured. You don't arrive at work at 9 o'clock and then do 15 minutes of personal housekeeping, which in fact could have been done in advance. Your brain needs to be ready to work and all of your housekeeping needs to be done beforehand. And if you arrive less than 8 minutes before your interview, you don't have any time to do the tasks which come up. Maybe you have to fill in paperwork. Maybe you have to have your picture taken. Maybe you have to complete an exercise. You essentially have, if you arrive in less than 8 minutes, no contingency for there being a long line in reception. The receptionist taking a couple of minutes to locate somebody, doesn't have the person's cell phone, and all she could do was leave a voicemail. And now suddenly you don't know that the person who's interviewing you knows even that you're in reception.
And completely not your fault, and you're in trouble. You're starting off the
interview. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whose fault it is, right? They don't know. I mean, and you could say, well, I need to get there an hour before, but then in that case, Murphy says, okay, they'll call and the person will be at their desk. And why is he here an hour early? Doesn't he have a job? Doesn't he have anything else to do? That's weird. So look, 8 minutes gives you enough time for some of these unforeseen events and still to be at the interview room or in the manager's office or cube or whatever before the start of your interview. And look, I hate to say it in today's digital world, but it allows for the contingency of your clock not matching the recruiters or the interviewers. Right now, my desktop clock says it's 12:13. My iPhone says it's 12:14. And I'm betting my iPad is not exactly right. I mean, it could be. Despite the fact that we'd hope that Apple would send all the same time to all these devices, or AT&T would, here I am in the US, there's discrepancies. Who knows what time the interviewer has? This is less of a problem than it used to be, but still there are discrepancies. 8 minutes early is enough contingency to take most of the discrepancies out of the equation.
Right. Now, of course, 8 minutes early, the other side of that is, 8 minutes late is not the other side of the coin, right? You can't arrive late.
Yeah, I suppose there is too early, but the definition of too late is 1 second.
Not on time.
Not on time. And what's funny about that, though, is people think if I walk up and I'm there at 7:59 and 59, then that's okay. But that's not actually true. If a manager looks at their clock and it's 1 minute till and they look around for you and you're not there, and when they finally see you 30 seconds before the set time of the interview, they see you walking, they're going to ding you. I hate to say it. They're going to ding you.
You don't get credit for being on time in that case. Right. They just, you pulled it out at the last minute. That's how.
Exactly. It's like, wow, this person, now maybe you planned ahead and there were 5 unforeseen Murphy moments. Great. Okay. And the manager still says, woof, if she doesn't know there were any Murphy moments, then wow, that was lucky. You slid right in there. Look, we'll talk more about how to address the queuing theory that exists in terms of when you leave your house or when you leave the office or whatever, but leave an hour earlier than you think you need to and go ahead and get a coffee 300 yards away from the building so that you know how long it will take you to get to the building. Build a buffer in there that you can be sitting at a Starbucks or at a Caribou Coffee or whatever in order to be sure that you're close enough that all of the travel issues that could come up, which we'll talk about later, won't come up at the last minute. There is no excuse for being late, which does not say to the recruiter or the interviewer, the hiring manager, I didn't plan ahead well enough. And that's not the first message you want them to be hearing.
Yeah, but are you saying, though, that interviewers are just so non-human that they don't understand reasonable things that could happen that were unforeseen, like, getting lost or your child being sick or something like that? I mean,
that's what I like doing. I like going around telling a whole class of people in the world, calling them non-human. Oh. No, look, if there are 100 people that want the job and interviewing is never, you did good on one thing, so therefore we're going to hire you. Rather, it is either the death or the win of 1,000 cuts. Then by definition, look, interviewing is designed to keep people out. It is an artificial reality created by companies to keep people out. And the default answer is always no. If we don't know enough to say yes, we say no. And we don't go looking for reasons to say yes. We look for reasons to say no. If they haven't even listened to your interview answers yet, which hopefully you're well prepared for, and you're giving them reasons to say no, you're digging a hole you can't get out of. If you say to them, I got lost, they're going to say, well, you didn't plan ahead enough and you didn't drive the route in preparation. And if this is important to you, and here you are telling me it's so important to you, why didn't you do the work? And frankly, if we assign you work that's important, but you don't prepare and you don't do some contingency planning, why would we want to hire a person like that other than for just the barest menial labor? If you say I got stuck in traffic, again, I didn't leave early enough is what you're saying. The train didn't run. Well, again, I didn't leave early enough to be aware that there's a possibility that any given train on any given schedule might be out of service. My childminder or my nanny is sick. Well, okay, I didn't, I lived my life without contingency plans. Not good for any kind of professional position. My husband had to take the car. Okay, again, contingency planning, not there. A sign of you lacking contingency planning, which if you're going to be a manager, frankly, or if you're going to be a professional, those contingency planning is a part of those people's lives. If you're a lady and you ripped your hose on the way out of the door and you want to chuckle about it. Again, I didn't leave any time to take care of emergencies, which happen all the time. There is no excuse for being late, which does not say in the recruiter's mind, this person didn't plan ahead well enough. It's that simple.
Yeah, pretty simple.
Don't be late. Look, if you're late to an interview with me, you could almost not come. Of course, that would be even worse, not coming. But you can safely assume that I'm not going to be excited. And I have to start in neutral to have a chance at being excited at the end of a tough interview. So if I start not excited, you might get me to neutral at the end of an interview. And if I'm in neutral at the end of an interview, I say no.
Right. I assume we've said this several times on the podcast, right? We're both former Army officers. And one of our sayings was, the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in war, right? And so preparation is pretty important. And some folks, I think, make the mistake of thinking of job hunting as being a popularity contest. It's not a popularity contest. It's a competition, right?
Yeah.
The hiring manager, you said earlier, is looking for reasons to say no. Not trying to say yes, is looking for reasons to say no. And those who do best during a transition period are those who work hardest. Yeah. And working hard is preparing.
It's preparation.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Look, there's a whole series of recommendations we'll make on preparing for interviews, answering questions, practical stuff around that. That's all in the future. But for this cast, we're going to concentrate on the preparation around arriving on time. And there's two parts to do this. One is before the day of the interview, and the other is on the day of the interview. Look, folks, before the interview, make the journey to the interview address at least once from where you will be coming on the day of the interview. If it's in a hotel or another building, still.
Preferably also at the same time that you'll be arriving.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, good point. Yeah, good point. In fact, I just noticed recently on Google Maps that you can, this may have been out for a long time. I'm sorry, folks. I don't keep up with all the latest hints and tricks of everything, but I just noticed that on Google Maps, you can actually say, what is the traffic like at 8 a.m. or 10 a.m. or 2 p.m. in major metropolises, which I thought was brilliant, right? Seeing the traffic at 10 o'clock at night is not helpful. It's the next morning that might be helpful. Now,
folks, I'm not suggesting, sure, and Mark's not suggesting that
I know
Google Maps is not a substitute for actually driving it.
There is no digital preparation here look, nothing wrong with it. Look at the data, right? And then drive the route.
Yeah.
Because looking at Google is not sweat, right? And I suspect Ask.com and others have the very same sort of Yahoo Maps and so on, and MapQuest and so on. Look, you still make the journey, even if it's a building you know. Even if you know the building, you may not know where the parking is. You may not know how to get the last 200 yards from the train station to the building. You may not know how to get from the parking upstairs and across the street. That's true in airports I go to. I've been to the airport before, but I've never flown into a particular terminal, and the terminals are all different, and you don't know where the cab line is. As Mike said, make the journey the time you'll need to leave. Traffic, public transport conditions can be very different at different times of the day. How many parking spaces are there? I'll never forget a guy who was driving around at the back of the parking lot, and I was with him. We were going to see not a client, but a vendor, if you will, sort of a partner in a effort we were making. And he drove around for a couple minutes and said, let's go right to the front of the parking lot. And he turned to me and he just ripped my head off. He says, well, why would there be parking lot spaces at the front if in fact there are no parking spaces at the back? I said, because maybe there are visitor spots. And sure enough, there were. Look, if it's going to be difficult to find a spot, you need to add some time for that. Okay. And then once you're there, look at the building, assess the presence of the company. Small companies are not likely to have their own security or receptionist, but they may have to deal with a building security or receptionist, who is even less motivated to help you. And they may have no security or no receptionist, and that might be good, but you need to know that. The worst thing in the world is to almost leave enough time. Just thinking through. If you just sit at home and think this through, and you end up in front of the building and then go, oh my God, there's a line at security. It's 8:00. Maybe you didn't really pay attention when the company said we do all of our interviews on Wednesday. You're there on Wednesday and there's a line at reception. Now you're there 20 minutes early, but you've never seen this line. You don't know how fast that receptionist works. You don't know how fast that security guy works. You don't know whether the printer's going to break down or not. And suddenly you're sweating. And to me, that sweating, that anxiety it can be a death knell for the rest of your interview, right? Because now you feel out of control. Now you're nervous. Now something that you would describe as out of your control, not true, was in your control if you'd have done what we recommended, is affecting your ability to interview well in 30 minutes. You start off with a negative mindset and panicky a little bit about, oh my gosh, I'm going to be late, rather than thinking, okay, what are my 3 key points? That's the issue, right? You're going from a potential positive to a known negative that you could have avoided. So, yeah, and obviously smaller buildings, not as much security, bigger buildings, more security, and receptionists. I remember we were in London once for a client delivering some training, and we thought the security seemed quite significant for the building we were going to, until we realized we got to the top floor where we were conducting the training for some fairly senior people in the company. And the reason why security was important was because you could look across, and I hate to say this, but you could easily have done something dangerous to Buckingham Palace from where we were. It had a clear view of the palace, which is, those are the kind of things that you don't know unless you do some advanced prep work.
Do some advanced work, yeah.
Yeah. Look, if there's a receptionist, if you're at a larger building the day before or the week before, go speak to the receptionist. Tell them you have an interview. Check out you're in the right place. Find how long security takes. What has to happen, right? I promise you some reception person is going to say, pretty smart dude. There was a dude in here last week and he totally hosed it up. He was late and he was panicky. He was in my face. And sorry, but his lack of preparation does not create a sense of urgency on my part, because I got a bunch of other people I got to worry about. And tomorrow that guy's gone, but the next day my boss is still going to be here. Look, in most buildings, it's only a few minutes, but in government buildings, in multinational buildings, in certain physical locations, a la Buckingham Palace, there can be screening comparable with that at the airport, right? Whatever the time taken for security is, add it to your 8 minutes. And look, if it's a 40-floor building, it's going to take 3 or 4 minutes to get up in the elevator, particularly if you're there at 8 in the morning and you got a bank of elevators and there's 50 other people there. And so you're going to get the milk run going up that building. You want to be finished with security before those 8 minutes, the 8 minutes prior. Okay, but now let's go on the day of the interview. You've got to add the journey time. You've got to add the parking time, the walking time, the security time, and 8 minutes, and subtract all of that sum from your interview time. So if the journey takes 30 minutes, parking looks tricky and you're going to add 10 minutes, there's no security, you need to leave your house at least 48 minutes before your interview. Add at least 30 minutes as contingency and more if your journey is complicated, or if you're relying on public transport, or if it's rush hour.
Yeah.
All that stuff matters.
Yeah. Preparation. Figure that out ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't get there 2 minutes beforehand and know you're in trouble already. So
right. Yeah. That panicky feeling. I bet you every single person listening to this cast, I mean, Tens of thousands of people listen to this cast and they're like, yep, I felt that, right? You think you're pretty well on time and then suddenly something happens in reception or security or can't get that person on the phone. Every single light is red and suddenly your heart is beating a little bit faster. And again, it's the combination of negative thinking and the absence of positive preparatory thinking about what you're going to do in the interview. And suddenly you're in a pickle.
Absolutely. Now, our third point, take account of security. You've talked a little bit about that already. Do you have anything to add there, or did we?
Yeah, look, we've already covered it, but it has become such an issue. We just reiterate the point a little bit here. Many people don't realize, folks, if you don't realize this, large companies, government organizations, nonprofits nowadays are security targets. They often have extensive security protection. In cases we've experienced, your name has to be on the visitors list for that day. And by the way, when you're doing logistics for the company, ask them. That you can ask them a month in advance or 2 weeks in advance of the interview. Does my name need to be in security? Who do I ask for? Is there different security for the building rather than for the company? Okay. Some buildings will photocopy your ID. Check to make sure you have your ID. Okay. In many places, you can't leave reception without being escorted. If you're going to get there at 8 a.m. and you need an escort, you better be there early enough to address the fact that they may not have enough escorts for everybody. Nearly everybody requires that you complete a visitor form and you have a temporary badge. Some of them even have your photograph on them. And they look pretty fancy for something that prints out in like 5 seconds. All this technology is great, but it slows you down. In some larger sites, you can't even drive your own car. The building's a mile away from reception and you've got to consider that as well. You have to wait for a driver or a bus or a shuttle to take you. Again, all this security can add time. Don't be standing in reception, tapping your fingers, waiting for the security guard to do whatever he's doing and stressing out. That's the issue, stressing out right before your interview. Find out what your procedures are, how long they'll take before you go to the interview.
And that's not enough. You also got to plan for Murphy's Law because sure enough, if something can go wrong, it is going to go wrong on the morning of the most important interview of your entire life, right? That's just the way it works.
Yeah. I remember the first time somebody said Murphy's Law of the kitchen. And I chuckled because of course there's a billion Murphy's Laws. And it was, if you drop toast, it will always fall buttered side down.
Yeah.
I love that. And look, by the way, there are some of you who will listen to what we're about to say and say, oh, that means I should be there an hour before. No, you have to have Murphy planning involved, but that doesn't mean you get to be there an hour before and then your Murphy planning makes you feel so good about things only to discover later that it irritated the recruiter. So there's some subtlety here, but look, Murphy's been around a long time and the problem with expecting the unexpected is that, oh yeah, it's unexpected. But even though it's hard to add a contingency for something we don't know is going to happen, the fact is there are some things that are reasonable to expect of people who are going to be interviewed. Look, Wendy and I have interviewed a lot of people, and Mike, you have too. There was snow, there was an accident, you fell down the stairs, your kids are sick, your parents are leaving the hospital, school's closing for the day, managers demanding their current employees come to a mandatory meeting, right? Oops. Cars, trains, buses, aircraft breaking down, right? Confusion about the time zone, season changes, police actions, demonstrations, construction. And all of this can happen, and you've got to still leave enough time to make sure Murphy doesn't keep you from meeting your 8-minute rule. And by the way, let's take it a step further. If you have a good reason for being delayed, don't let it stop you. Last year in the UK, there was a major snowstorm overnight. Wendy had a candidate due to arrive at 10 a.m. At 9 a.m., the hiring manager called to say he couldn't get to the office. His 4x4 was stuck at the bottom of the hill outside his house. So significant weather. Wendy called the candidate. He told her he just got on the first train out of his station. He'd been waiting 2 hours in sub-zero temperatures, knowing full well that there'll be a limited number of trains, and he wasn't sure which one would work, but he got there extra early so he would get on the earliest one he possibly could. And look, if he'd carried on with the journey that he had to get into central London, he'd have been on time on a day when all of London and the UK basically ground to a halt. Yeah, the interview was canceled and it was reheld later in the week. But he had major kudos, major cool points for attempting to get to the interview. And look, he was smart. He had excellent knowledge. He presented well. But the fact is, his efforts to get to the interview caused the interviewers to love him in advance. What's wrong with being loved in advance to start an interview?
Yeah. It reminds me of a story I heard. I don't know if this is true. You might actually know better than me. But this recruiting firm that I used one time. The story was that one of the owners had a conference in Chicago she was going to. The weather was terrible. All the roads are blocked. And she literally rented a tractor or a bulldozer or something, some big piece of machinery to get to the conference in time.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I am, those premium members, the thousands of people who subscribe to premium content get a weekly note from me called Things I Think. We have stuff in there, just thoughts I have that might not be big enough for a podcast, recommendations, experiences I've had that might be more timely than timeless, that are helpful for people. We get a lot of positive response from it. And Things I Think is based on, is the title of a part of a column by a guy who I really admire his writing style, Peter King, who writes about American football. And Peter King tells stories all the time about travel and people willing to help. And, he got to New York. He couldn't get home to Boston and nothing could be done. And, a guy offered him a ride. And that guy is enshrined in Peter King's Hall of Fame for, figuring out how to do it, for offering to help and allowing Peter to get where he needed to go. And the question becomes, how hard are you willing to work? It's an hour from my house to the airport. And if you'll remember a number of years ago, Mike, we had a client in Hartford, Connecticut that I had to go to every month for a couple of days. And it was January. This is probably 4 or 5 years ago. And the weather was awful. And at like 4 a.m, I called the car service and said, look, don't come. I mean, this is bad. I mean, the ice on the interstate and everything really, really bad. I'll call the client. It will literally be the first time I ever didn't make it to a client. And the limo company said, driver's within 15 minutes of your house, sir. Now, I was ready, and so I said, okay, we'll try it. He came early, knowing full well how long it would take. We were the only car for 40 miles on Interstate 10 in the United States, which is for those of you Brits, it's motorway, and it's big, and we were the only car on it for 40 miles. We got there before they closed the interstate. I think it was actually closed, and we drove around it, and we got there. And because the weather was bad, but it was bad for the roads, but not for the air, I was able to fly out and I was able to get there. And the client assumed I wasn't coming. Now, if I remember right, I think I tipped that driver like $300 when in fact the cost of the drive was $150 or something. I tipped him all the cash in my wallet, and it took 4 hours to go 50 miles. We went 15 miles an hour on the interstate, and we slid and slid the whole way. So it can be done.
Yeah. So you do these things. The interviewer may not tip you $300, but you may end up getting the job. That'd be a good thing.
So there is some Murphy Law, and you got to consider it. And so just wrapping up, the rule is 8 minutes early, not 15. 15's too much. 10's even too much. 8 is a way to remember it easily, not just 10 minutes as, 10 is a rough thing, but 8 minutes early. That's Wendy's guidance. You got to get prepared beforehand. There's stuff to do the day, before the day of the event, and then there's stuff to do the day of the event. You've got to consider security. It's become a given now. 10 years ago, it was not. And you got to consider Murphy. And by the way, we'd love to hear stories of people who Murphy bit. Maybe you survived it, maybe you didn't, but it's okay to not survive Murphy every once in a while. It's not okay to repeatedly get bit by Murphy and to say, well, Murphy doesn't really exist, because he does. The fact is, the right time to arrive at an interview is something very few people know. And it's 8 minutes before. And you take into account the right things, and you'll have a better chance of your interviews turning out the way you want them to.
Good. All right, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks, partner.
All righty. Thanks, everyone. That's it. Hope you enjoyed it and got value out of it. We'll see you again next week. In the meantime, have a great one. So long.